But now I would like to give over to John.
Okay, thanks very much for coming today. It's my job just to give you a bit of background so you understand what we mean by, I'm going to call it VALERU. Okay, so I'll try and speak slowly as well, but if you're not sure of something I say, just please tell me. I don't mind people interrupting, I have no problem with that at all, so please feel free to speak. We have talked, all of us in this room work within a formal educational structure and institution, and it's kind of the way we work and the things that we do, it's almost like the air we breathe, isn't it? Because we assume it, we take it for granted, we think it's the only way of doing things. And bound up with our ideas of what a university is, what a university is for, is we make a lot of assumptions about what knowledge is, we make a lot of assumptions about what learning is, and how people learn. And we kind of think that learning is something that goes on in school, and then later in university, it's something that goes on in a lecture room or a classroom, and it kind of happens when we tell people something and somehow they've learnt it in the way that I'm speaking to you now. And of course, this is a very effective mechanism, and the idea that we have bound up in the idea of the university is something that we've had now since, is it about 1840, something like that, Humboldt University? The first modern university in Germany, in Humboldt. Prior to Humboldt University, universities were quite different institutions. There were only about 4 subjects. We still had the idea of lecture and tutorial and all the rest of it. But it's quite interesting that the Industrial Revolution was created not by people studying in universities or research projects. It was done by individuals doing it in a sort of amateur way. And it was only really when universities were created, particularly to foster technical information, that the process of industrialisation really gathered pace and was organised, and we had proper research and instruction and discipline so we could develop our economy. Whatever you think about the modern world, and we all have different experiences, there is no doubt that we are going through a period of profound economic change. We talk about globalisation and what it means, but there is no doubt that there is a reordering of the world economy. Things are restructuring. And I'm going to say a little bit about how that's happening. Obviously, technology is important, communication is important. But we are at a point where we do have to think where if the university that was created for the industrial age is really as relevant for the post-industrial age, the information age, the knowledge age that we are now in. And I'm going to start, before I start to talk about the varieties of practice of VALERU, I'm going to say a little bit about why. Why are we in this room now? Why was this sort of event not occurring 20 years ago? Why is it occurring now? And we have to ask ourselves that question. VALERU, let's just begin by defining it, is about trying to foster and capture some of the knowledge and learning which is going on outside the university. Because while the university has carried on in the way that it was set up to do from the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, the world out there has changed quite dramatically. And it's now, some of you will know that some industries create their own qualifications, their own degrees. We used to make jokes, didn't we, about McDonald's degrees are in burgerology. But we don't make jokes about qualifications for Cisco applications. Because if you want to work in IT, a qualification from the employer, from the industry, is more valuable than one from us. We also have to think about the way that knowledge, the increase in the pace of knowledge, the creation of knowledge, is increasing all the time. There is more and more to know. So people out there, once they leave us, their learning doesn't cease. Their learning has to now, as we say, occur throughout their life, and they have to update. If you do not update, sooner or later, somebody else who's kept up to date will take your place. It may not be in Russia, it may be in China, it could be in my country, it could be anywhere in the world, because we are in a globally competitive economy. And so you might say we've been a little bit slow to recognise the significance of this change, but certainly politicians have started to realise that it's important that we do catch up with this. So VALERU really is about trying to capture non-formal learning. This is non-formal learning is structured and planned. It's the sort of thing Cisco Systems are delivering to people. It's the sort of thing that you might be doing as part of continuing professional development. In my own profession, for example, I am required that every 2 years I undertake a minimum of 50 hours formal learning to keep up to date with the latest developments. I'm an urban planner by profession. That's my background. So as part of my continuing membership of that professional body, I have to engage in some sort of non-formal learning on a regular basis. And it's an established part of professional bodies, occurring outside the formal educational system. We've been slow to recognise its importance. The other form of learning is informal learning. And again, we've had very, very narrow views about the way that people learn. We've assumed that we are the people who know about learning. But actually, people are learning the entire time, particularly in the workplace. Just as when you come into higher education, you may know something about subject, but you have to learn about the business of running a university, don't you? There's a lot of unplanned knowledge learning that goes on, a lot of informal knowledge. Some of it you speak about, some of it you don't, some of it's tacit, it's unspoken, but there are common assumptions that you share with your fellow practitioners. And when you come in, when you're a new academic, and you know a little bit about perhaps giving lectures, you know a little bit about things, you have to learn about the business of the university in order to make it run. And it's that informal learning that really makes the world go round, isn't it? If we don't have it, nothing can occur. So those are the two aspects. That's the non-formal, informal learning. Validation is about the process of converting those two forms of learning, either for admission to a program, so you capture it and say, right, because of this, these forms of learning which we haven't recognised hitherto, you can come onto a program, or you can use it for the obtaining a whole award, as our French colleagues unfortunately aren't with us, but in France you can obtain a bachelor degree on the basis of your professional experience and knowledge. There's a process you go through, but you can obtain a bachelor and a master's degree. In our case, you can't do that. Our regulations don't permit us to do that, but if you came to the University of Chester, you can obtain up to 2/3 of an award on the basis of your non-formal and informal learning. So we have that flexibility. So that's just a little bit about defining things. We've used the term VALERU, validation of non-formal and informal learning, but really VALERU is more a politician's term than an education's term. And these sorts of practices have been going on for a very, very long time before the politicians woke up to them, and they're known by various other names. In my university, we call it Accreditation of Prior Learning, APL. In Sweden, they call it validering. I don't know how you pronounce that. I don't know if anybody speaks Swedish. In many other countries, it's called, for example, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand. I think sometimes in the UK, it's called recognition of prior learning. And in the United States and Canada, where these practices have been the longest established, basically they invented it, and the practice is most widespread, it's called prior learning assessment, PLA, and recognition. So it goes under various names. It started, I mean, the origin goes back really to 1910 and a book by John Dewey called How We Think. And John Dewey really was the first person to sit down and think about the way we actually learn things, as opposed to assuming it took place in a classroom. And his ideas were taken up by a number of US colleges in the 1930s, usually as the basis for admission to a program. In those days, admission to a program was simply by formal examination, but in some cases, some colleges would allow people onto programs without having to pass the exam because of their particular practical experience, their vocational experience. The thing that really changed was World War II, because during World War II, there were a lot of people in the army, in the armed forces. They weren't studying anything formally, but of course they were gaining knowledge and skills. The army trains people, as you know. The armed forces has always trained people. So at the end of the war, they had a lot of people coming out from the armed forces who had a lot of knowledge, experience, didn't have formal qualifications. They had universities and colleges who wanted to admit people. So the practice spread, and that was really the big kickstart to it. The practice has gradually spread globally of admitting people to programs or enabling people to complete part of their program through the use of these practices. Usually the motivate, and it's not been driven by politicians, it's been driven by people like us, educationists, who, and I would guess a number of you are in this room because you have a concern for social justice. You know that there are people out there who are excluded from the formal educational system in some way, that they have knowledge, they have skills, they have ability, and yet we don't recognise it. And that really is that's what's driven practice for most of the 20th century, that concern with social justice. So I'll give you an example. There's a lot of practice in South Africa because educationalists saw it as a way of enabling Africans to access formal education. They had very, very poor schooling. All the money went to the white people. The Africans had very little. They had very little formal education, but they had the skills and the ability to succeed in formal education. So there's a lot of practice in South Africa, and it grew up for that reason. It was to do with social justice. And I think underpinning the sort of work that was done in our own institution, that really at root is the concern. How can we reach out to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to participate fully in higher education? And of course, it's not just excluded groups in that sense. It's adults. It's adult learners. If you are saying education is for everyone, except anyone over 22, what does that do for the rest of the population? So there's always been a concern that adults who have particular needs also have experience and knowledge. They know all sorts of things. How can we bring them into the system? So historically, it's always been driven by that. It's also, I'm not going to go into the details, but throughout the 20th century, all theories of learning and theories of the development of knowledge have helped to fuel this process. Because it's been realised learning isn't a didactic process, it's a social process, it occurs in lots and lots of places. It's almost, we cannot stop learning. And theory of learning has sort of kind of captured that. And similarly, our ideas of knowledge are now much more sophisticated than they were, say, 50, 60 years ago. So there have been practical reasons, social reasons, and then theoretical developments which have helped foster the process. But in the last 20 years, things have changed because the politicians have got interested in it. And these are three key documents and three key bodies. First of all, UNESCO. UNESCO, for quite a few years, has been interested in the idea of what I'm now going to call VINL. The OECD, similarly, has also woken up to the importance of this as an issue for education institutions, and the European Union. So since 2012, all higher education institutions, or all participating nations in the European educational area, have to have some sort of provision for recognition of informal and non-formal learning. And the reasons are not, they are partly to do with social justice, but they are to do with the change which is now affecting our economy. I'm not going to labour the point because we're not really here for an economics lesson. But as I said at the beginning, there is a profound transformation occurring. For the first time, we have a truly globalised economy. The things that happen here are not the result of decisions taken here. They are the result. Global capital is mobile. It can go wherever it wants, and it will go where it can make the most money. And my country was, we were the first to. We started industrialising from the 1760s, but we have been losing jobs in manufacturing industry now year on year since 1966. All that time, every year that goes past, and now I think the proportion of people working in manufacturing is about 8%. Now, partly that's to do with the substitution of capital for labour, which also means different kinds of jobs, and the jobs which are there are more knowledge intensive. We no longer have the need for lots and lots of unskilled people. It's difficult. Anybody unskilled, it's very difficult to find work. Unskilled work is disappearing. I don't think it's so common here, but you go into a UK supermarket now, and there isn't somebody who's behind the till. There's a machine. Yeah, you don't put petrol in your car. Or if somebody doesn't put petrol in your car, you do it yourself. You go to a McDonald's. Who clears up the table? You do. It's not like years ago where you would have an army of people doing these things on very low wages. Those jobs are disappearing day by day by day. And of course, as we see investment in artificial intelligence, voice recognition technology, and all the rest of it, these sorts of things, if people can, with great precision, drop a bomb through a window in a building 4,000 miles away, there are lots of things which technology will replace. It is now, driverless cars are now legal in California. The world is changing. Wherever there is the opportunity to substitute capital for labour, it will occur. Or, for example, in a lot of the professions, we see the rise of what's called paraprofessionals. That is, the routine work is delegated out to people on lower wages, so they can do that business. I mean, I don't know how it is in this country, but in my country, if you want to make a will or you want a divorce, you don't go to a lawyer anymore. They're too expensive. You do it yourself, or there's somebody on a lower wage doing it. This process is accelerating the whole time. And it does mean that we have to, all societies have to invest in the knowledge and skills of their workforce on a continuous basis to keep pace with the developments which are occurring. There is another reason, of course, and as I said, the labour market, the global labour market is restructuring. We are seeing the death of old industries, the growth of new industries, new specialist roles, and so on. Shorter occupational life cycles. You can no longer expect to be doing the same kinds of things at the beginning of your career, at the end of your career, as you could do 50 years ago. Things change more quickly. We are seeing a global convergence in terms of income and mobility. There are people moving all over the place. They want to take their skills and their qualifications and their knowledge with them. And of course, nations are having to compete one with another. I'm not going to refer to too much theory, but this is quite a good read. I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy called Robert Reich. He was Bill Clinton's Labour advisor. Interesting guy. Wrote a book about 20, 30 years ago now called it's called The Work of Nations, which is a play on Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations is the first great classic textbook on economics. How do we become wealthy? How do we create wealth? Adam Smith had it nailed in the 18th century. Robert Reich is talking about what are we doing? What are our occupational roles in the new globalised economy? And he breaks them down into 4 groups. First of all are the routine production workers. These are the people whose jobs are disappearing because they can be replaced or they can go to a cheaper location. There are then the person-to-person services. These are harder to replace, but they're low wage, aren't they? Low skill, few job prospects. Yeah? There are the government workers. We are to some extent in that category, and we are also to some extent shielded from global competition. Yeah, the government protects us, doesn't it? It gives us roles. So that's why we've got the time and energy to engage in departmental politics, isn't it? Because we're still competing with one another. The winners in the new global market are what he calls the symbolic analysts. These are the people who invest heavily in education, who continue to invest heavily in education throughout their working lives, and they are people who deal with symbols, with abstract thinking, whether it's computer software, with images, with abstract thinking, abstract idea. These are the global knowledge workers, and these are the winners in the global marketplace. These are the people, whereas these people are losing jobs, these are the people who are gaining jobs. But underwriting their ability to create the technologies of tomorrow and engage in software writing and all the rest of it is continuing investment in formal higher education. They recognise its value. As I said, we were created at a particular point in time to fulfil a particular function. What I'm trying to convince you is that that function is no longer necessarily commensurate, no longer fits with the way that the world is changing. And there is a question about how we can sustain growth. And there are various economists for many years used to say it was through trade, then it became fashionable in economists to talk about technology, all sorts of things. We have nowadays, sorry, it's a little bit of economics, we have nowadays, the dominant paradigm is what's called endogenous growth theory, and it's based on notions of human capital theory. I don't know if you've come across this. There's two views of education. There's a view of education which says it makes people cleverer, better. Yeah? This goes back to two Nobel Prize winners in the 1960s. One guy called Schultz, who won the prize, I think, 1962. He's an agricultural economist. And he was the first person to demonstrate that it's not the technology that increases productivity, it's what people do with it. And what people do with it depends upon their education. It's the smart people who can generate growth, in other words. And then another guy called Becker, 1964, who took those ideas for a more general theory of human capital. There is another view which is more pessimistic. This is called signalling theory. And what signalling theory says is education doesn't make people smarter, but what it does is clever people are very good at negotiating the education system, and that's a signal to particularly employers that this is a clever person. So the education doesn't make people any cleverer. I mean, it's a bit pessimistic, that view. But the dominant view is, as I said, this belief in the development of human capital. I don't suppose you really want to. I mean, we can go. These slides are on. If you want to see more of it. The other interesting aspect of this is the idea of global economic competition between nations, because we've become rather used to the idea, haven't we, that they're going to make it all in China. Yeah? What are we going to do? What are the rest of us going to do? Well, they're making everything. I know you guys do some engineering. Germans do some engineering. But, I mean, for example, somebody once told me, I mean, the way they work in China is you have an area that specialises in something. And so there's one town in China that makes 80% of the world's ties. Neckties. They're all made there. So if they can do that, what the hell are the rest of us going to do? We can't all work for the government. We can't all flip burgers. We need to do things. And so there is a lot of interest by governments about how they can compete globally. How can we make a living for our citizens? And again, this is if you're interested in this, a guy called Michael Porter. It's a book in 1995, and his title, not the wealth of nations or the work of nations, the competitive advantage of nations. What gives us as a country a competitive advantage? And there are various things that make us competitive. We have certain base advantages. Russian Federation has lots of oil, doesn't it? So it's a petro-economy, essentially. And these things, of course, are extremely valuable. I won't go into the details of it, but the essence of the theory is, although base advantages are a big help, the things that are really going to help you are what he calls advanced specialist factors, which, these are things which, pharmaceuticals rely heavily on research and education. Aeronautical engineering, again, the engineering you do in this region depends upon this university, doesn't it? Producing talented people, researchers and students who can work in those industries to maintain the competitive advantage that you have. The other thing that's happened, it's not just that the economy has changed, but the people have got the message, haven't they? The aspirations of people have changed. People now demand higher education. They want it in increasing numbers. I don't know the figures for the Russian Federation, but in my country, when I graduated in 1979, 7% of the population went into higher education. It's now 43%, and that's by no means the highest. I think Poland is something like 60%. I think they're the world champions. So there are people out there want what we have, because they understand that the world has changed and that they need to invest in their education. And the question is, and that's why we're here, is whether we, as universities, are actually able to adapt to this world out there. And sometimes I have my doubts, I have to say. Sometimes I wonder. I mean, it's quite interesting where David and I myself work. We work, as I said, we work with adults. We tailor things to their learning needs. To us, the rest of the university feels like a car factory, a product of the industrial age. Yeah? Standard processes, students come in batches, they're dealt with in standard ways, all the institutional processes are standard, the bureaucracy is standardised, and there we are trying to tailor things to people's individual needs, because their needs as adults in the global economy are not the same as that mass process. They have particular things they need to learn, and they're not tolerant of sitting in a classroom being told things by somebody who's out of date or doesn't understand what they do. Adults have very clear ways of expressing their views, and they do not wish to waste their time and money on things which are not going to help them. What's going to help them? Again, I don't know the figures in Russia, but we know in our own country, once people get over 24, overwhelmingly, they are interested in education to advance their career and their income. No, but very few people over the age of 24 are studying out of the joy of learning. They have a very instrumental view. They want to learn because they understand in the modern world you have to do it. And that's their motivation. We talk a lot about mode 1 and mode 2 knowledge. Again, if you're interested in these things, ask me and I can give you the reference. Essentially, mode 1 knowledge is what we deal with in universities. It's universal, it's not about application, it's peer-reviewed, it's subject discipline based. It's all the things that we hold dear. That's what we do. But the world out there actually wants something else. They want something which is applied, they want something which is not peer-reviewed, but which has multiple stakeholders. The rest of the company, the rest of the organisation, the profession, those kinds of things. It is knowledge which they wish to see created at the point of consumption. It's not something to go in a journal or a book. It's something they can work on, something they can use, something they can apply. So the problem is when they come to us as the university, if we don't understand that, we are not meeting their needs. And they'll go somewhere else, which is what they do. They'll go somewhere, they'll go to, again, I don't know the figures in this country, but I think the private training industry in the UK is something like £5 billion a year, something like this. It's a huge amount of money that we're not getting because we can't do it. So they'll go to other people who can do it and will do it. So the global drive for validation of non-formal informal learning, as said, is a challenge for us to adapt. How can we adapt? I said, luckily, we're not in a position where you've got to make it up from scratch like they did in the 1930s. There is a lot of experience to draw on. And I'm just going to conclude by just summarising the varieties of practice and how it's used. So you've got a clear idea about how it's done and some of the problems it involves. Most of it is past learning, capturing past learning. If you think about it, you can have learning from the past, where you've done something. You can have current learning, or you can have learning for the future as well. There's a temporal dimension to learning. But most of what's done is about capturing past learning. It's rather less on current learning and even less on future learning. It can be used for admissions purposes, as we've said, and that's how this practice began. Or it can be either, as I said at the beginning, it can be for a whole qualification, as they do in France, or it can be part qualification, as we do at Chester. I should explain, in the UK, universities are highly autonomous. So what we do may not be the same as what another university does. And I know from a recent study that at least 2 universities in the UK will allow you to obtain a whole qualification from past informal learning. But we don't. We're 2/3. A lot, 50%. That kind of thing. So that's one way that you can do it. You then, sorry about the language. This is not my language. This is from a paper. Again, if you're interested, perhaps I should change that. There are 2 issues when you try to incorporate the learning that people have from the world outside the academy. The 2 approaches when you try to accommodate the learning that people have from another context. The first way, this is Procrustean, is that you say that learning must be consistent with the learning outcomes for the program. So whatever the student has done is irrelevant unless you say it fits with our program. And this is a major constraint because very often the learning that people have is not consistent with the program that you've devised. People learn all sorts of things, and it's not always easy to accommodate. If you say this is what you're going to learn in this program, and somebody comes along and says, well, I've been doing this for 5 years, and you say, well, that's fine, but you haven't actually done what we want you to do, then it goes to waste. So the second option is Trojan horse, and this is where the curriculum adapts to the person, to their learning. That's what we do in Chester. We adapt because we negotiate our curriculum, whatever the student brings, we can accommodate. This is a basic constraint on why there is less of this, because people say, this is what we do, Unfortunately, we can't change it. What you know is not consistent with that, not compatible, therefore it's irrelevant. Okay, so we had a brief discussion yesterday. Why isn't there more of this in France? And there are various reasons. That's one of them. That we're not sufficiently flexible to adapt to the needs of the learner. Right, so that's past learning. There is also then for current learning. And this is very often where the student, as part of the program, is doing some sort of workplace project which is compatible with the program itself. And we do a lot of this. So somebody's doing something in the workplace and then that becomes part of their curriculum. I have to say something about the European qualification framework, the Bologna process, because it is absolutely essential that you have full adoption of the EQF to facilitate this process, and I'll explain why. Up until the Bologna process, nobody knew really what learning was worth. What is it? Whatever you do in one place. And generally speaking, what people would do is they would say, oh, well, somebody's got a degree from that university, that's a good university, therefore we think that's okay. Right? It's that sort of process. What the European qualification framework enables you to do for the first is actually quantify learning. You can say how much of it there is, you can say at what level, and so on. So it's extremely important. Learning outcomes, now I don't think you have them, I'm not sure if you use learning outcomes, but the great thing about learning outcomes is they specify what somebody knows when they've completed a program. They say at the beginning, this is what you should know, and then when you've finished, it says, now you know that, you can do that. So it's a very clear signal to anybody else, this is what that person knows. It also has the great virtue of focusing on learning, not acquisition of subject knowledge. Acquisition of subject knowledge is a part of learning, but it is not all of learning. And learning outcomes, I've said, focuses people on learning. Very, very important distinction. It also enables you to make decisions about the level of learning. Is this at level 4, level 5, level 6, level 8, whatever it is? Very, very important that you know, so you have level descriptors about what you expect somebody to be able to do at different levels. With quantification comes transparency. Everybody knows what it is. And transferability. So, although there are, I think it's 47 nations in the European higher education area where there is automatic recognition of qualifications, because this is the first time in the world this has been done, nobody in the world will question a qualification from a participating nation. So you can come to us in Chester. Nobody will question your qualifications. Okay? But equally, you could go to Australia. You could go to the States. EQF, everybody knows. Okay? I mean, I don't know how it works in this country, but we have a special organisation for countries outside the EQF to try and decide what people's qualifications are. We have a lot of students from all over the world. Say we get somebody with a degree from Ghana. Well, we don't know what it's worth. So we go to this organisation and they tell us. But of course, if they're part of EQF, we don't need to do that. Once you have quantification, transferability, transparency, you've got the proper foundations for quality assurance. Because everybody knows what you're talking about. You've got a benchmark against which to assess what's going on in a university. It also, and this is very important for adult learners, it enables you to create intermediate awards. We're used to the idea of longer awards and then the shorter bachelor awards, master awards, but you can have much smaller qualifications. Our most popular qualification is 30 credits ECTS, a postgraduate certificate, because most adults in their working lives don't have much time, they haven't got the energy for a master's degree, it's not that important to them. What they want is something focused, short, to the point that they can achieve. And the European qualification framework gives you that ability to create shorter awards. People can build them up. It's a credit system. So you can start with a short award, get a longer one, and then get a full master's if you want. But it gives you so much more flexibility, transparency, quality. It's a wonderful framework. And I sometimes wonder if people really understand what it's there to do. Because it really underpins the whole process of lifelong learning. Very important, the European qualification framework. Right, I'm just going to finish by talking about assessment, because there are two methods, essentially. First of all is the method which you might, from some of the comments, that people are familiar with this method, and it's called the credit exchange model. And in the credit exchange model, the student provides evidence of their learning, usually in the form of a portfolio, and then some sort of decision is made about its value in terms of level and volume of credits. Okay, so that's the system. How do you assess it? Well, usually what you do is you get a committee together, jury you might want to call it, of people who, perhaps senior people, to give it some authority, and they make some decision. There might be a discussion, a viva, with the student to interrogate them to see what it's worth. That's the dominant model around the world. That's how most people do it. We do something slightly different in Chester. We have what's called the development model. And in the development model, we are not assessing there is a portfolio, but it's pretty short, and we're not assessing it. What we assess instead is a reflective review which tells us what that person has learned from their experience. That's what we assess. And that reflective review includes referencing to appropriate literature. So it's a proper academic piece of work. And the way that they're structured is the first part will say, here's what I did as evidenced by the portfolio, Appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C, that kind of thing. The bulk of it is an analysis. And the purpose, if you know anything about reflective cycles, a lot of them will have a section in after the experience where people will consider expertise in the area and then compare their direct lived experience with what the experts are saying in the literature. What does that tell me? Okay? It's not necessarily the experts are right or wrong, but it's a fresh perspective on what you're doing. The purpose of it is to help people think differently about what they did. There's a very good quote from a chap called W. Deeming Edwards, who you may have heard of. Experience alone teaches us nothing. We can have all kinds of experiences, but it's only when we're exposed to different thoughts, different ideas, different perspectives that we can really make sense of our experience. So that's what goes on in the reflective review. And then the final part is, okay, I've had to think about it, I've read about it, I've lived it, now this is what I'll do. So there's new learning, and that's what we're assessing. Not the experience, we're assessing the new learning. We don't have a committee, it's just done by a tutor. So it's administered more successful. So those are the two methods. And I think that's probably the last one it is. So that's a very quick run through why we're doing this, or why we hope you're going to do it, why now, and the ways in which this can be done, and then a little introduction to the terminology. I know it's a lot of information in a short period, but we don't have that much time. So, okay.